Most people think they know how the Roman Empire fell. The first things that come to mind are barbarian invasions, burning cities, defeated legions, and overthrown emperors. But if you take a closer look at Rome's story, you'll notice something different. The downfall of most empires is not caused by enemies from the outside. They weaken from within first. And throughout history, one of the most powerful forces capable of weakening an empire from the inside has been money. Rome was no exception. In many ways, Rome's decline began with the decline of its currency. And that's exactly what today's story is about. Because despite the fact that nearly 2,000 years have passed, many of the mistakes Rome made still appear before us today. First, let's take a look at Roman money. For centuries, the backbone of the Roman economy was a silver coin known as the denarius. It was first minted around 201 BC. The coin was made of almost pure silver. Roman soldiers received their wages in denarii. Merchants used it for trade. Ordinary people stored their savings in it. In short, the denarius was more than just a currency. It was also a symbol of Rome's power. People trusted Rome, and because they trusted Rome, they trusted its money as well. But maintaining a powerful and admired empire was never easy. Armies had to be paid. Roads had to be built. Cities had to be expanded. Borders had to be defended. And all of this required enormous amounts of silver. As time passed, both Rome's expenses and the expenses of its citizens continued to grow. The empire was fighting Germanic tribes on one frontier while battling rivals in the east on another. Meanwhile, political instability at home was becoming increasingly difficult to control. The problem was simple. Government spending was rising much faster than revenue. The emperors had two choices. Either taxes would have to increase, or they would need to find an easier solution. As you might expect, they chose the easier option. They began reducing the silver content of the denarius. From the outside, the coin looked exactly the same, but it was no longer the same coin. During the reign of Augustus, a denarius contained roughly 95% silver. Over the years, that percentage began to fall, first to 80%, then to 60%, then to 50%. Eventually, almost all of the silver was gone. A coin that had once been made from precious metal became little more than cheap metal covered by a thin layer of silver. The Roman government believed people wouldn't notice. But they did. People always notice. A merchant notices when his money is no longer worth what it once was. A soldier notices when his wages buy less than before. A farmer notices when the price of everything keeps rising. And this is exactly where inflation begins. The quantity of money increases, but its value decreases. Goods that once cost a single denarius now require several. Soon, even several denarii are no longer enough. Prices continue to climb, and people's confidence in the currency begins to fade. This is exactly what happened in Rome. Soldiers demanded higher wages. Merchants refused to accept debased coins. Some only accepted payment in gold. Others returned to direct barter, because no one wanted to hold money that was constantly losing value. The problem is that once trust begins to disappear, restoring it becomes extremely difficult. The Roman government tried to solve the problem by creating more money. But the more money it produced, the more trust disappeared. And the more trust disappeared, the more money it created. Rome had entered a cycle that was almost impossible to break. And Rome's story is far from unique. Nearly every major monetary crisis in history has followed the same pattern. Rome simply became one of the most famous examples. However, Rome's biggest problems were only beginning. Debasing the currency had already made things worse, but an even greater crisis was approaching. Today, historians refer to this period as the crisis of the 3rd century, and the name is no exaggeration. Between 235 and 284 AD, Rome endured nearly 50 years of constant turmoil. Its borders were under continuous attack. Deadly plagues spread across the empire. Civil wars seemed endless. One emperor after another rose to power, only to be overthrown or assassinated. Some failed to survive even a few years. Others ruled for only a matter of months. From the outside, Rome still looked like an extraordinary empire. However, beneath the surface, things were rapidly falling apart. And once again, money was at the center of the chaos. The imperial treasury was running dry. The army still needed to be paid. The borders still needed to be defended. Yet tax revenues were no longer worth what they once had been. The silver collected through taxation had lost much of its value. The The government, meanwhile, was desperately searching for a solution. Eventually, a new figure stepped onto the stage: Emperor Diocletian. Without question, Diocletian was one of the most disciplined and determined rulers Rome ever produced. However, even well-intentioned solutions can sometimes make a crisis worse. For a time, the solidus helped stabilize the system. In fact, it continued to circulate throughout the Eastern Roman Empire for centuries. However, for the Western Roman Empire, it was already too late. Years of monetary manipulation, economic decline, and lost confidence had weakened the foundations of the empire. The first blow against Rome did not come from the barbarians. Instead, the first blow came from the damage Rome had inflicted on its own currency. Rome's story did not end with Rome. History has a strange habit of repeating familiar patterns. The names change, the countries change, the rulers change. Yet when it comes to money, human behavior often remains remarkably similar. What happened in Rome was one of the earliest large-scale examples of a monetary collapse. It certainly would not be the last. Roughly 1,500 years later, a similar story unfolded in Germany. The First World War had ended. Germany was burdened with massive reparations and an economy under severe strain. Government debt continued to grow. Faced with mounting financial pressure, policymakers chose what seemed like the easiest solution. They began printing more money. At first, the strategy appeared to work. There was more money in circulation. Payments could still be made. The system seemed to function. The reality, however, was very different. By 1923, Germany was experiencing one of the most infamous episodes of hyperinflation in history. Prices that once changed over months began changing in days. Soon, they were changing in hours. People carried bags full of money just to buy basic necessities. Workers rushed to spend their wages the moment they were paid. Waiting even a few hours could mean losing a significant portion of their purchasing power. Life savings disappeared. Pensioners watched decades of hard work evaporate. The middle class was devastated, and millions of ordinary people found themselves trapped in economic despair. Interestingly, not everyone lost. Those burdened with debt often benefited. People who owned real assets were in a far stronger position. Landowners, factory owners, those holding foreign currencies. The pattern looked very familiar. As the value of money declined, some people managed to protect themselves, while others lost nearly everything. Just as they had in Rome. Years later, a similar crisis emerged on another continent. This time the stage was Zimbabwe. In the early 2000s, the country was struggling with severe economic problems. Production was falling, debt was rising, and once again the government turned to a familiar solution: printing money. Initially, it seemed like an easy way out. What happened next was catastrophic. By 2008, Zimbabwe experienced one of the worst inflation crises ever recorded. Prices were doubling at astonishing speed. Stores could barely update price tags fast enough. People spent their salaries the same day they received them. Waiting until tomorrow often meant their money would buy far less. Eventually, Zimbabwe was forced to abandon its own currency. Citizens turned to the US dollar and other foreign currencies instead. A nation had effectively lost faith in its own money, and once again the pattern was impossible to ignore. Rome, Germany, Zimbabwe, different centuries, different societies, different governments. Yet the outcome was strikingly similar. When confidence in a monetary system begins to disappear, economic problems can quickly evolve into something far more serious, which brings us to an important question. If this pattern has appeared so many times throughout history, how certain are we that our own time is truly different?